Hello, Humane Marketers. Sarah Znakrocha here. Welcome to another episode of the Humane Marketing Podcast, a place to be for the generation of marketers who cares. This is the show where we talk about marketing your business in a way that feels good to you, is aligned with your values, and also resonates more with your conscious customers because it's not pushy, ethical, and also beautiful. So if you're a regular here, you know that I'm organizing the conversations around the 7 Ps of humane marketing. And if you're new here and this is your first time, welcome. I'm so excited you're here. You may want to download your one-page marketing plan with the 7 Ps of humane marketing in the form of a mandala at humane.marketing/one page, the number one and page. So again, humane.marketing/one page. And with that, with no further ado, let's dive into today's conversation. Hey, Robbie, so good to see you, speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's one of those topics, right, that 5 years ago, we probably wouldn't be sitting on a call together, or at least not for that, probably more for networking, because that was your thing in the past, or it probably still is. But yeah, you kind of pivoted with the pandemic and all. But yeah, I kind of just dove right into it. So welcome to the Humane Marketing Podcast. Love you. I love to have you here. Why don't you take us a little bit into the past, but not too much, because we really want to talk about, Zoom calls, group calls, facilitation online, and all of that, which is the topic of your latest book as well. So take us a little bit to the past and then to the present.
Well, Sarah, I spent over 10 years before the pandemic working to be recognized as a networking expert with a focus on networking at conferences. And that included writing my first book, launching a podcast, um, creating a group coaching program, writing for Harvard Business Review, doing a TEDx talk. I was poised to be an overnight success 10 years in the making. My TEDx talk came out January 2020. And by March 2020, nobody cared. It was sort of a not
Yeah.
a very relevant topic to be an expert in around in-person networking, because all in-person conferences and events really kind of vanished. So I was trying to figure out how to show up and add value. And I wrote 9 ways to network in a pandemic as a blog post on March 12th, 2020. And one of those ways was to host a virtual happy hour, which I did on March 13th. Unbeknownst to me, that really launched a whole new thriving 6-figure business, all kinds of new revenue streams, and really impacted a lot of other people's lives. I mean, it impacted my life, but the ripple effect has been extraordinary. And by the end of the year, I was supporting organizations with bringing their events online with less stress and greater participant engagement. And as you mentioned, I am about to release on the 3-year anniversary of that first virtual happy hour my third book, which is Break Out of Boredom: Low Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events.
Wonderful. Wow, what a comeback. Kudos to you. Must have been quite a dark night of the soul. I imagine that, just kind of like realizing, oh my God, now what?
Well, I mean, I accepted what was happening on March 9th because I had been paying attention to the news and sort of
Mm.
was watching this come
You
starting
saw this
probably in
wave just
January.
kind of like
Yeah, I
coming.
was
Yeah.
watching it kind of encroach our shores and get closer
Mhm.
and closer. So I think I came to terms with it, but I didn't know what to do next. And I don't like feeling that. I mean, I'm a person of action, so that feeling of being stuck. But I was very fortunate because on that Wednesday of that week, which is the 11th, I met with my peer mastermind, and they gave me a kick in the pants and said, "You don't think of networking as something that only happens in person. You have been building a global network for 5 years virtually. Why don't you go help people?" And that got me out of my own way. And that's what led me to write. Basically, that night, I started working on the 9 ways list and published it the next day. It got, a good response because it was very timely. And I said, okay, I need to do one of these things. And I just looked at the list, and it was 8 p.m. on a Thursday night which is why the event is held 5 o'clock on a Friday, because it was the next open spot that I could imagine calling a happy hour. And I didn't intend it to be a global network, a global event, but 36 countries have been represented amongst the members who have attended.
Nice.
And I'm still hosting it. I'm still hosting that
Wow.
event, nomorabadzoom.com, 3 years later.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it kind of demonstrates this idea of that you are not, you're not kind of pushed into a niche and that's where you're stuck for the rest of your life. There's a common thread to your
Mm.
message, right? And whether it is networking in person or now networking online and doing online meetings, your concept or your approach to it is still the same. It reminds me of my dark night of the soul, where I got into a trademark mess where someone was basically blocking me of using gentle marketing, which was the term I used before. And for like about 2 weeks, I was stuck a bit longer, Robbie. For about 2 weeks, I was like, well, now what? How do I get out of this? And everything I built, the books I published, and 2 years of work and all of that. But then I realized people told me as well, it's not about a word, you still have the community, you still have the concept. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
great to hear those stories, I think, for
Right.
listeners as well, to realize, well, you can rebound and start something new, and it's still going to be you, and it's still giving you your approach, but just slightly different topic. So yeah, let's talk about this slightly different topic, because I think in one of the videos I watched from you, you said, at the beginning, you didn't even know you had breakout rooms came with your free Zoom account. And so, yeah, that's how we all felt at the beginning of the pandemic. I've been working online for years and years, so I knew Zoom, but it's true that a lot of people had like no idea how to, for me as well, breakout rooms was not a thing that I was using. So nowadays, obviously, everybody is Zooming or Teams or whatever they're using. So how have you seen this evolve? Like, what would you say in general is the kind of the state of the online meetings
Mm-hmm.
now? Do most people use them to their advantage and, that it's really great, all these Zoom meetings we have, or do you hear kind of the opposite?
Well, just to go back to your earlier point, the through line for me is that events are about content and connection.
Right,
People were leaving their house and getting on planes to travel to conferences, not just for the information they would learn, but for the people they would meet. And
right,
so when events became synonymous with the virtual events, I knew we needed to figure out a way to make that possible virtually. Now, prior to the pandemic, an online program, which was typically a webinar platform where you couldn't see participants and participants
right,
couldn't see each other. It
right.
was 45 minutes of death by PowerPoint, followed by ineffectual Q&A and no one
Totally.
moderating chat.
Oh
So,
God, yeah,
so I think
horrible.
we've come a long way in what our expectations are, but I also think it depends on the industry, because I still know, I've been invited to do some programming virtually for the employee resource group of like a bank or a law firm or financial sector, and like they tend to be blown away by what I'm doing because they're using it in a very minimalist approach to how they use whatever platform they're using. They're just like turning on their camera and that's it.
If
And
that, because I've
if that,
assisted to some of the meetings my husband has to kind of survive through, and
yeah,
nobody is on camera. Like,
that's
and
just it. So I think that it really is a range. I can't answer like one way, but I also don't focus personally on corporate space or the workforce.
mhm,
My book and my approach is really focusing on the presenters who have between 60 and 90 minutes to offer value to a one-time audience. Now, a lot of this can be therefore applied if you are teaching a course or a class. This is, or even like a weekly team meeting. You can apply a lot of this to that. But I think there's a few more restrictions. So, for instance, I don't recommend using third-party tools like Mentimeter and Jamboard, which I love. But if you only have 60, 75, 90 minutes, you might lose people because if they're not familiar, and you don't know if they're familiar because you don't know the audience super well, you might lose them. And if it's about engagement, you're going to get 70 to 90% of people to responding to a Zoom poll, and you might get 30 to 50% actually answering one of these third party polls. And so, yes, it's fancy. Yes, it's cool. But if the end result is fewer people actually taking action and people feeling a little bit confused about something, that's not where we want people to be. So
Right.
I also, I really focus a lot in the book and on the work that I do on some principles around purpose first design and also quality facilitation. So I'm specifically focusing on the Zoom platform as far as the technology, but those other pieces around facilitation and purpose first design are applicable to any medium, including in person.
Mm.
So I think there's a strong Venn diagram because I also do in person event design consulting. And I've been doing that a long time and then back to doing that again now that people are back to in person. So to me, there's a big overlap between how you design an in-person workshop or presentation for 90 minutes and online, but then there's the outliers that you have to consider for both. So I think that there's a lot of potential. I've done incredible programming. I've got some great stories in the book about some really cool outcomes we've achieved by bringing people together across geographies to have really in-depth conversations about important topics. I also think that people's tolerance for the sort of boring approach is they really don't have any. Like, I think people are zoomed out and Zoom fatigue. That's why I call it breakout of boredom. And by the way, breakout rooms, I went from not knowing I had access to, you know, I don't know, my book's like 60 some odd thousand words and like 10,000 words, almost 20% is about breakout rooms. So I have a
Yeah, so let's
lot to
go there.
say.
I want to really have you walk us through kind of some of these, yes, they're technicalities, but I think the way you explain them is always comes back to purpose, like what's the common purpose for us to be on this call? That's how I understood it when I went through this checklist that you'll share with us at the end. So let's start with the waiting room, right? That's usually our first experience when we go on to a Zoom meeting. So how, if my listeners are hosting a group Zoom call, what are some of the things that can be done? Let's just take Zoom as an example, can be done to already kind of give people this feeling of I belong, or in
Yeah,
the right group here. Like, what
sure.
can we do?
Well, for starters, if you're having a group meeting, stop using your personal meeting room
Mm.
because if you create a meeting, a specific meeting for that group, then the name of that meeting will be what appears in the waiting room. So that'll assure people, but you can also have different settings. So if you use a different link, you could set it so that participants are muted upon entry. Now, for
Mhm.
my one-on-one calls, I do use my personal meeting ID and I don't mute people because if it's just two of us, I
Right,
I don't need you to be muted. It's actually kind of an inconvenience for you to be muted because
right.
people start talking and I have to point out to them like, don't forget to unmute.
Yeah, the
um,
usual, you're muted.
yeah. So then the other thing I would say for waiting rooms, you can customize it beyond that. And there's a bunch of different options. A lot of what I'm going to be sharing is under zoom.us, and then you go to settings, which is on the left side menu. And you can just start from the top, and actually really close to the top is waiting rooms. So there's some really cool customization, including you can embed a video, you can put an image, you can put text. I sometimes have text just says like, take a breath, like
Yeah,
take a
seen
moment to
that before.
yourself
Hmm.
before you come in.
Yeah.
But you need to know that whatever you put for your customization will be what people see for all of your meetings for that one account. So
Okay.
if you make a special video for like a big event you're doing, you have to then remember, put a note on your calendar to switch it back to whatever your more
So you
general.
can customize each waiting room separately for each meeting. It's
You
just
can, but
one.
you'd have to like keep going back in and remembering to switch it on and off.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay, great. So one question, can people chat already in the waiting room? I don't think so, right?
They can't. Right now, the host can communicate with people in the waiting room. And I think that they're going to come out with a feature where the waiting room can then respond back to the host individually.
Okay.
Um, you cannot change your name, for instance, in the waiting room, but the host can change your name. So there's some new features that are coming out.
Okay.
But I also want to go back to, you mentioned purpose first design. I address it as well. So I want you to think about, as people are coming in to your session, they're going to be thinking, feeling, and or doing one thing. At the end of their time together, they're going to be thinking, feeling, and or doing something else. And then between is the transformation. So
Right.
if you really spend some time thinking about where they're starting and where you want them to end up, that will help you decide the structure, flow, what exercises, what kind of content, how much time to spend on things, what to put in the waiting room, whether or not to have a breakout room. If so, what kind of question, what is the goal of, even for a breakout room, like what's the purpose of a breakout room? Is it around networking? Is it for them to discuss something? Is it for them to share? Is it for them to feel like they belong? Like, once you understand the sort of really primary focus of each piece of it and how it fits in with that overall goal, it's going to help you design a much better quality experience for your participants. So that's the purpose first design piece. And then the
Mm.
facilitation is just to stop confusing people by saying the incorrect thing, like, go ahead and raise your hand in chat. There's never been a raise hand button in chat. I've heard that phrase a lot. Or pointing down and like pointing here and saying go to reactions, when that's not where it is. Reactions on your side is over here. So if I go to tell you like, oh, go ahead and go to the top right of your screen and click on the, I'm not pointing at the right side of your screen. This is the right side of your screen. So that's called mirroring. And
Mm,
if you were on a stage physically, you would know that. Like, you would
right.
know that if you pointed to your left, they're gonna see it on the right. But when we're doing this virtually, people kind of forgot all about that. So that just hurts our brains. It makes our brains work a little extra hard. And that's part of that Zoom fatigue, is confusing instructions, or the person who spends a lot of time saying, all right, let's see, I'm going to try to share my slides. Let's see. Oh, the file's not open. And then they like share their desktop and you watch them like go through everything on their desktop. You're like, as they like narrate every step. We can all get 5% better every time we Zoom,
Yeah.
whether we're participating, whether we're hosting, whether we're speaking. Just aim to get that little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many small details that we need to learn, right? That now it's this extra layer. And actually in some of the videos you mentioned, it's really helpful to first have an extra screen that you can, have one just dedicated screen for your PowerPoint presentation, for
Mhm.
example, uh, and even an extra person, like someone who helps you read through their questions in a Q&A setting, or yeah, just like there's so many things that we have to manage or we haven't even started talking about breakout rooms, but yeah, there's a lot of things going on that it really is sometimes helpful to have an extra person.
I think if you have more than 20 people, I think it starts to be for most people, that's where it makes sense to start thinking about having a second person. But that
Right,
second person could be like a fellow. I know, for instance, I know speakers who support each other. Well, they'll
right.
take turns. Like, one will moderate chat for one person's program, and then the other one will go back and moderate chat for the other person's program.
Yeah,
Awesome. You can train an assistant or an intern, or a VA, or even a member of your community to manage chat and manage the Q&A and manage all of that. So
yeah,
and then, but it scales up because I train people on to be Zoom producers. And so Zoom producer would do all the tech, not just the chat. They would handle any technical issues that your community has, getting their sound to work. And then they would also manage breakout rooms and sharing slides if you need them to, anything needed, as well as managing chat. And then there's the executive sort of virtual event design that I do, where I'm really providing the strategy ahead of time, training the speakers and how to look good, all that stuff. So there's layers, but I would say starting with having a good understanding of what does a good Q&A even look like, and then what kind of support you might need to pull that off. If you've only got 6 or 7 people in a room, I think you're fine on your own.
Fine. Yeah.
But you still have to know that while I'm doing my best to look at the camera, there's something happening in chat. So I have sort of techniques where I ask people to write their question in chat, but to write the word question in all caps before their question. So I'm more likely to notice.
To
I
see it.
also increase the font size by to 150% of the original font size in chat, which makes it a lot easier to catch when things are happening off to the side. So these are all little things that over time, one thing becomes easier, then you add on something else. So I'm not saying everyone has to do everything all at once. That's the 5% part. So I actually have a program called the 5% Advantage. I launched it in May of 2020. And my wife was like, why would anyone want to get 5% better? And I said, no, every time it's about like continual improvement. Like it's amazing like how much faster you will improve if you aim to just keep getting a little bit better each time.
I like that. I do want to ask you about breakout rooms, because that's, I think, one of the things that, a lot of these programs now include, right? Now that we've gotten used to being on camera on Zoom, where it's not just like a webinar style anymore. And so one of the things you mentioned is this idea of having clear instructions. And I think I probably get better 5% every time I do it, but it's true that it's so essential to give clear instructions before sending people off into breakout rooms, because you explained, the situation where people find themselves in the breakout room and they're like, anyone know what we have to do? And, they just start chatting about who they are and all of that. So what's kind of like best practices about giving clear instructions for these breakout rooms?
So start back with the purpose first design. What is the goal of the session, the breakout part of the session? If it's a quick icebreaker, then you can do either 2 people for 5 minutes or 3 for 6. If you can open more than, I don't know, 10, 15 rooms, I would say 3 for 6 minutes is better, because it's less likely that someone's going to get stuck in a room by themselves because of the internet failing one person. But that would be like a quick icebreaker question. So they're literally just going around for a moment to say hello to each other. You might do 3 or 4 people for 10 minutes to similarly just have people go around and answer a question. Each person gets a couple of minutes. And then that goes all the way up to, a discussion where people might get, it might be 5 or 6 people for 15 minutes where people really all answer a quick question, but then they dive into thoughts about that question a little bit more. So what happens is that if you just sort of throw people in a room without any clear question, someone will eventually unmute. Like at first, they're all going to like look at each other like, what do we do here? The person who's most comfortable, most privileged, probably has been around this community the longest, is going to be the one who unmutes, and they may not relinquish the microphone, and it might become just a whole session of one person talking. And now you're in the main room and you're like, awesome, people are engaged, they're having so much fun. But that's like checkbox engagement. Like in reality, one person had the mic for the whole time. So what I want to say is intentional engagement is that we provide not only a question that is specific, one question, not lots, don't ask them to choose from 3 and all that, but you also provide an answer. So you say, what's your biggest win of the week? Here's mine, to get you thinking. Here's mine. You then put the question that you just said as the prompt in chat, and you say, if you need to, you can open up chat and see the question. And let's go alphabetically by last name. So if your last name's closest to A, you'll go first. We'll go in that order. And if you don't have a last name showing, go ahead and add it, or go going first. And that way they get in, their brains have already been thinking about the question, because when you tell your answer, you're sharing a story, and stories ignite stories in other people's brains. So when I tell you my big win of the week, you start thinking about, well, what's my big win of the week? So you're already a little bit primed to participate. And then you find out the order and you realize, oh, there's a good chance I'm going to be going first. Like my last name is close to A. And you're like, oh, so you really are mentally prepared to unmute and jump in. Now, some people get kind of cutesy about the order and they do like longest and shortest hair or colors of shirts or birthdays. All of those are kind of distracting. Take some time to discuss, end up leading. I mean, I've been in so many sessions like that we end up talking about horoscopes because we were asked to like go in the order of our birthdays.
Right.
So I say like alphabetical or reverse alphabetical by first name or last name. And if you really think a particular order would be helpful, for instance, maybe people from most experience to least experience with something, you can say when you get into the breakout rooms, go to chat and put in the number of years you have with this. And we'll use that to organize, most experience, least experience. But all that structure is actually, it helps people feel like they belong. And I actually think that thoughtful structure is about inclusion. It's about people feeling not just invited, but welcomed into a conversation. It tells shy people and introverted people and newcomers and people who maybe you speak a language that's different than the dominant language being used. It tells them exactly what the rules are. There's no like in crowd knows how to ask questions or how to unmute. Everybody knows everything. So I think we as hosts and facilitators sometimes like relinquish our role by saying you all figure it out. But just like an in-person event, like people thrown together at a bar don't often find people they want to meet. But when you structure an event at a bar and you've got name tags and people who are welcoming, you've got activities, you have people interacting and engaging with each other, that little bit of structure is what leads people to find each other, not just the randomness. And I think online we need the similar structure to help people really find value in those breakout room discussions and want to stay in touch. Everybody wants to find their people. Nobody wants to feel like they're the only one in the room having this challenge, problem, identity, whatever it is. So I love breakout rooms for that reason. I think it provides so much community building. And then you bring them back. And I think an important part of breakout rooms is thinking about what kind of debrief. And by default, a lot of times the debrief is just have people use the raised hand feature. Or worse than that would be go ahead and unmute if you have anything to say. Like in person, you would never be like, all right, folks, just start talking. It's just so weird that we do that online all the time. So I would say alternate between sometimes having people raise their hand, which is self-nomination. Sometimes have people write things in chat. Sometimes have them write things in chat, but wait to hit enter until you tell them. I call that a waterfall debrief. Sometimes I have people nominate someone in chat. So like who shared a really great win, nominate them and let's get them to share with all of us. There's just so many ways to bring lots of voices in, not always the same. Like I'm an outgoing extrovert. Sarah, I will raise my hand to answer a question, not knowing what the question even was. Like I'm like, sure. But then you have people like me dominating conversations all the time. So the structure allows someone else to grab the mic or to be invited to grab the mic if they choose.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm
You're
grabbing
welcome.
the mic. I'm the introvert in the rooms. Yeah, so many good things. I'm just going to kind of reiterate the main takeaways for me. So first of all, yeah, the clear instructions when you send people into the breakout room. And also what I really loved is, and what we haven't been doing in my Humane Marketing Circle community, is defining ahead of time who goes first. I think that is a big aha for me, to really say, yeah, to take away that awkwardness, like, do you want to go first? No, you go first. So it's like, okay, it's already clear who goes first. What my community recently asked me is actually to have 2 minutes of reflection before they go into a breakout room, so that they can kind of think about, because we kind of go deep into in the breakout rooms. But the other thing I learned right now from you is for them to already have my answer. So that it, like you said, it's a story, right? So they come in with a story. And I love that. One thing you didn't mention that I'm doing, and you'll tell me what you think about that, is, so I usually, for now, I don't go into the breakout rooms just because I don't have another person to help me manage it. So I'm the one sending the messages into the breakout rooms saying, okay, it's time to switch. Next person, gets the 3 or 4 minutes to talk. Do you use that? Is that a good practice, or do you
Yeah.
recommend?
So there's a couple of things that I didn't mention that you just made me think about. One is there's a setting when there's an option when you set up the breakout rooms that will put a countdown clock on the top right. So it's really
Right.
helpful to turn that on, because then when everyone gets in, they know they have 10 minutes and they know how much
Right.
time is remaining. Helps them divide the time up equally. It helps them wrap their conversation up. And at the end of that 10 minutes, my recommendation is to change to be a 15-second countdown clock. It's default 60 seconds. But if you're watching the time count down and then suddenly you have a minute, there's this moment of almost awkward. Awkward is when you say a big goodbye to someone at a restaurant and then discover you're both going the same direction for your cars. That's awkward in person. But similarly, like you get to this point where everyone's like, all right, great. See ya. Oh, 60 seconds. And then some people leave. Some people are like, oh, I have a whole nother thing I think I can squeeze in 60. Like it just,
So
you
you're
show them the
saying it's
countdown.
better to have less time, actually.
Like, yeah, just
Okay.
get like, okay, we're wrapping up. We're coming back. Like you got your 10 minutes, then come back. Or to tell people, I mean, I guess if you wanted to keep the 60 seconds, you can say it's going to be, I guess just give people clear instructions.
Yeah.
And then, yes, there's a couple of ways to broadcast into the rooms. One is text only. And that's like walking by with a sign. Like if you were at an in-person event, you'd be walking by with a sign that said 2 minutes, and you wouldn't say anything. You would just walk by and try to catch. Not everyone would see it. You might be holding the sign behind some people's heads, right? It's a very small font at the top. Then they have broadcast voice, and that is a lot more jarring. If you want to use it, I think you need to tell people in advance that you're going to say switch, because it's a voice out of
I
nowhere.
never used it because I thought like that is so odd if all of a sudden they hear my voice.
Now, if you only had two people and it was very clearly like, pairing and then switch, I could see, because again, would you in person like ring a bell and call out, okay, folks, switch? Like if you would think about like, yes, it's disruptive. Now, the problem is if you have three people, you don't know when they switched. Like it's not as exact a science. And then there's also a way to broadcast an image, a video, or like slides, like anything you can put on your screen. You can broadcast that. That would be interesting to do if you had facilitators in the rooms and you wanted everyone to go through this content at the same pace. You would be advancing the slides based on a certain increment of time. Facilitators would then be sort of taking questions, and you would know that all the rooms were kind of moving through the content at the same pace, at the same amount of time for Q&A at the end, and you'd be managing that. They wouldn't be able to forward it. They wouldn't be able to annotate on it, but it is a way to like share the question. Again, it's disruptive in the sense that suddenly there's this thing on their screen that's blocking some of them. Although it's funny because the people are going to be actually over here and the image over here if they have the side-by-side set up. So, but generally, yeah, the broadcast messaging, I would say like a 2-minute warning is usually really useful, like halfway through, 2 minutes left. But the countdown clock up here is really, really helpful for most people.
Yeah, I'll start using that. I haven't used that. I didn't know it existed. And so thanks to your checklist, I now know where it is. So yeah, we're coming to the end. And so let's not forget to mention your checklist. But we started with the beginning. We went through the, breakout rooms and all of that. And you said in the design, it's so important to also think of, how are we going to end this? So what is a good ending? Do you use any rituals or, you mentioned pictures, I think, in one of the tips as well, where you kind of take a screenshot of everybody. What are some good ideas for ending calls?
Well, I think a lot of times calls end with, well, we don't really have any time for any more questions. And that's it. So if it's a presentation, I think it's really smart to plan like 2 minutes at the end where you say, oh, okay, let me just, those were great questions. Let me just share some closing thoughts. And then you have like the reiteration of your main point, not new information, but like it could be a reiteration of your main point. It could be call to action, or here are some next steps, or here's what's coming up. But you make sure that if you're hosting, you give the mic back to the speaker, you thank them, you let them have 2 minutes, and then you take it back and say, like, thank you, here's what's happening next. So you want to think about having kind of a close that isn't just, we're out of time, and gets people thinking about what do they do with this next. I like to do something I call calendaring, connecting, collaborating, and I do this both in person as well as online when I design. Calendaring, connecting, collaborating. So calendaring is you ask everyone to take a minute to think about one thing they can do in the next 2 weeks that will help them move forward on this topic. And you say, great, now that you have that idea, open your calendar on your phone and find a time in the next 2 weeks that you're going to be able to do that and like look at your notes from today. And connecting is if you're not quite sure what to do or you need some help, look around at the people that you've been meeting with today and in breakout rooms and me and here's some other people and resources. These are the people that you can get support from. Write down their names, make sure that in those 2 weeks, you also reach out to some of them to say hello and build a connection or deepen a connection. And then collaboration is that we're not doing any of this alone. I'd love to know what happens next. Lean into each other. Together, we're going to build great things. So, this is your community. And I think that particularly if your goal is to move people from inspiration to action, having that kind of ritualistic closure is helpful because, some people will take tons of notes, but it's useless without a plan. And others are just listening and not taking notes. And so they also don't have a plan. And so building some time in, and that could be 10 minutes. That could be you can really draw that out if you wanted to, or it could be something you do kind of quickly.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, we allow ourselves to have time for that. And that really needs to be planned into the whole meeting, right? Oftentimes, like you said, you kind of find yourself just rushed at the end and it's just like, okay,
less
bye.
content is more. I think too often we try to cram a lot in. I wrote my first book in order to stop doing 2-hour programs. Like I had been doing this 2-hour talk for years and years and years. And I thought if I had a book, like I could say, oh, and you can read more about that in my book and not have to say every single word. And so similarly today, like literally I almost, 20% of the book is on breakout rooms. So we scratch the surface of it, but it gets people the information to realize that there is a new way, and then they can go investigate and DIY on their own or seek out support if they need it. But yeah, there's a lot of options.
Yeah, and since you said less content is more, right? I think also a point you made is like don't hide behind the slides, especially if we're talking about community calls and not some kind of corporate setting. So definitely, that's one big one for me. It's like whenever you can show up on the camera and not behind some slide.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wonderful. Well, please do share again the name of your book in that PDF that people can download and look at your videos to go and dive deeper.
Yeah. So the book is called Break Out of Boredom, Low Tech Solutions for Highly Engaging Zoom Events. It is going to be published later this week. So I'm going to just tell you, if you go to breakoutofboredom.com after March 5th or 6th, the link will be live and ready to go. Building a huge launch team right now. So reach out if you're interested in being part of that. I'd love a review. And the videos that you're mentioning, it sounds like you've done a good job diving into them. They're available at robbiesamuels.com/videos. And they're also some of the bonus content. So the book has a lot of free bonus content, and the videos, which are 30 plus strategy videos, and my No More Bad Zoom settings checklist. Those are one of, I think, 10 or 11 resources that are sort of bonus content that goes with the book. So all that's available at the breakoutofboredom.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robbie. I always have one last question that I ask all my guests, and that is, what are you grateful for today or this week?
My wife. She's amazing. She actually recently got laid off and wasn't feeling well. And yet, despite both those challenges, has been an incredible support. I've had a very busy couple of months getting ready for this book, writing and launching at the same time. And she holds our family together and our house together. And she, when we got married, said, you have higher earning potential than I do because you're entrepreneurial. And I said, you may regret saying that. And here we are. It's true. I've got a business because I had someone who really believed in me and make space for what I'm trying to create. So you all need to thank her because I've been able to do a lot of good for a lot of people because there's someone in my life who believes in.
What's her name, Robbie?
Her name is Jess.
Hi, Jess. I hope you're listening to this. Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be
Thank
here with us.
you.
Thank
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching and being part of a generation of marketers who cares for yourself, for your clients, and for the planet. We really are change makers before we are marketers. So go ahead, be the change you want to see in the world. And I hope to see you again next week. Take care.